$7 million. So there was another, my favorite baseball story happened when Richie Ashburn was playing with the Mets. The Mets had a catcher named Choo Choo Coleman, who was one of the funniest, entertaining players I've ever seen. Not very good, but entertaining. And the Phillies had a player named Dick Stewart on second base. Somebody hit a single. Stewart ran home. The throw came in at the same time as Stewart slid into home plate. And the umpire doesn't call the runner safe or out because Coleman had dropped the ball. So Dick Stewart says, "Am I safe or out?" He said, "You're neither. You have not touched home plate, and the catcher has not touched you with the ball." By now, Stewart is in the dugout. Choo Choo Coleman has the ball, the catcher, and he couldn't remember who the runner was. So he runs into the dugout and starts touching every player. And Dick Stewart is at the end, and Stewart sees him coming, so he runs back to home plate, and they get in a rundown between the dugout and home plate.
Let me ask you, when you were involved with the decision making, as you said, you were involved in many of the decisions that have created the modern structure of baseball and the structure we have today. You work with a lot of very interesting other owners. You work with Ted Turner, you work with George Steinbrenner, you work with Jerry Reinsdorf, obviously you work with Bud Selig. Can you provide some insight into George W. Bush when he was involved with the Texas Rangers? Can you just comment a little bit on some of the really interesting people you've worked with?
Yeah, Ted Turner was very interesting. He was very smart. Toward the end of his tenure with the Braves, he didn't come to meetings too much, but when he was there, he was very, very intelligent on most anything you would talk about. But he was a wild man. I mean, he was really crazy. And then I said, when he married Jane Fonda, I said, "Do you like Jane Fonda better than your first wife?" He said, "Not really, because Jane is always wondering where I am." He said, "My first wife never cared where I was," and that was more fun for me. But he was a George W. Bush was, I thought, a very sensible guy. He was very involved in the revenue sharing and all the debates we had, because he was co-owner of the Texas Ball Club, and he's a very funny guy. I mean, I was very shocked when he became president, however. I always considered him kind of the social chairman of your college fraternity, because he was always telling jokes and laughing and having fun. Very likable guy, and I thought very smart. There was a time when they thought he might be the next commissioner, and but because of his popularity has gone down so much, I doubt if he will be the next. Bud Selig, the current commissioner, he said the other day he definitely is going to retire at the end of 2012. So we'll see. You want to apply for the job?
That would be interesting.
Bud Selig is an interesting man. The public really doesn't love Bud Selig, in my opinion. He kind of comes across as a used car salesman when he's on TV. And he was at one point. But he's done a lot of good things in baseball, and the best thing he's done is made labor peace, where we haven't had any fights for a long time, and baseball as an industry is making money, revenues at $6 billion, and so he's done a good job. The other guy I want to talk about is Pete Rose. People always ask me, should he be in the Hall of Fame? Will he get in the Hall of Fame? I really don't know. He was on the verge of getting in about 2 or 3 years ago, because Joe Morgan and Johnny Bench, two of his teammates with the Cincinnati Reds, were encouraging the commissioner and the Hall of Fame people to let him come up for a vote and see what the writers would vote him in or not vote him in. But he's done some things. You know, gambling in baseball is considered much worse than anything else. The integrity of the game is so important. Back in 1919, the Chicago White Sox fixed the World Series. And that was the biggest black eye ever in baseball. So everybody is told all the time, no gambling on baseball. What Pete Rose did when he was manager of the Cincinnati Reds, he would bet with the bookies, and he would always bet on his team to win. However, the bookies figured out that on the games that he bet on his team to win, he would use his best pitchers. And when he didn't bet on the Reds, then the bookies knew to bet against the Reds because Pete wasn't going to use his best pitchers. So that stirred up everybody, and they finally supposedly proved that he did it. But in my opinion, Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame for the way he played the game. He played the game harder. He played with great determination. He was not blessed with great skills. He didn't have a great arm, didn't have great speed, didn't have great strength. He made himself a great ball player just by hard work and determination. My father, on his deathbed, was asked who was the greatest player of all time, and he said Pete Rose. So it'll be interesting. The first time I ever got involved with Pete, I met Pete's first wife, Carolyn, in an elevator in Tampa, Florida when I was a youngster. And my dad and I were on the elevator, and Carolyn Rose and their son, Pete Jr., were on the elevator. And my dad said, "Oh, Carolyn, your little boy's really a cute kid." And she said, "Yeah, but he cusses too goddamn much." So, but Pete, I think, should be in the Hall of Fame. Yes?
Might I ask, are the Philadelphia fans a source of joy to you, agita, or a little bit of both?
I love the Philadelphia fans, even when they boo me, because they're very knowledgeable. I found out about that the first year I was here. We had a game at Connie Mack Stadium, and two of our catchers, number one catcher, number two catcher, got hurt. So we had to put in our first base coach. Doc Edwards was his name. He had not caught in a major league game in maybe 3 or 4 years. And we put him in, and he threw a runner out in the first or second inning, and he got a standing ovation. And that taught me these fans were smart enough to know that here's a guy that hadn't played in 3 years, and he throws a runner out. And that's when I knew these people know what the heck's going on. I mean, when people loaf, when players loaf, when they do little things wrong, the fans understand it. When I was in Houston, fans applauded everybody. They didn't boo, they didn't react too much. Everything was okay. But not in Philadelphia. When you screw up, you hear about it.
Bill, what was it like going back to the eighth wonder of the world at the time? What was it like working with Judge Roy Hoffhines, who was a character in and of himself, and building the Astrodome, and then the aftermath with the AstroTurf and everything like that?
Well, Judge Roy Hoffhines, if any of you ever read my book, he's in there quite a bit, but he was the most brilliant man I've ever known as far as marketing is concerned. And at the time, it was the first dome stadium ever built. Nobody believed you could build an indoor facility, and we built one called the Astrodome in Houston. And he was really brilliant. And we had the roof was made out of plexiglass, and we had prisms between two pieces of plexiglass. The theory of that was that if you didn't have the prism to diffuse the light, the field would look like a waffle iron because of the rafters and everything in the roof. So this diffused the light. The problem with it was that it killed the grass. The grass would not grow. And we didn't know what to do when the grass started to die, so Mr. Hoffhines, with me at his side, called the Monsanto rug company. and said, can you guys make a synthetic green baseball field? And they said, we sure can. So Alpine said, how much is it gonna cost me? And they said $1 million. And I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. That's exactly what I'll charge you and let you call it AstroTurf. And then we got the thing free. So they paid us $1 million and then we bought it because we let them call it AstroTurf, and sure enough, it sold like hotcakes all over the world for every kind of athletic field.
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Does A-Rod go in the Hall of Fame?
I think I would vote for him. You know, it's an
You put that mystique out there.
interesting question. I mean, what are we going to do with McGuire? What are we going to do with Palmyra, Bonds, all
The
that?
the Astro guy who just got the
Clemens.
one of the three Bs, the Astros.
Bagwell.
Bagwell.
Bagwell. He's not going to go in.
Yeah, it's a tough case. You know, steroids, you know, there was no rule against steroids until about 4 or 5, 6 years ago. So, to me, if there was not a law or a rule against it, why should somebody be penalized if they took it 15 years ago? So it would be a very, I don't vote for the Hall of Fame. I do vote for the Veterans Committee, but it's a tough case. If I'm sitting there with a ballot, what do I do with Bonds? What do I do with Clemens? I don't know what I would do. It's tough. And how many other players that are in the Hall of Fame took something? It's a tough decision for those that are voting.
What's the next horizon for Major League Baseball revenues? I mean, you've tapped out with the new stadiums now. The media has come along, as you said, with MLBAM and MLB.com, ML Network, MLB Network, and all the portable devices. Licensing, merchandising, premium seating. That's all kind of reached its point of saturation, and it's going to be slow growth. So
Yeah,
there's
I
another
do.
horizon.
I don't really see anything on the horizon, John. You'll get a little more money from, watching a baseball game on your watch, and, all those kind of things. But I don't see the next big economic revenue piece. I really don't see it. If it comes at all, it would be electronic stuff. And, of course, there's some people that talk once in a while about making gambling legal, where you can bet on baseball games like you do bet on horses, but I don't think that'll ever happen.
Why wouldn't you play more double headers and market them differently?
Doubleheaders have become a thing of the past. The fans don't, I remember when I first came here, twilight doubleheaders were a big deal.
Yeah.
And now we do day-night doubleheaders, primarily because of the revenue.
And they're bad?
Well, if you do a doubleheader, you don't take in any more money than when you play one game. Our daily revenue is about $1.8 million. Every time we play a game, we get $1.8 million from the ticket revenue, and about $6 a head for the concessions, souvenirs, and all that good stuff. Questions, guys and girls?
I've just made one or two other questions. We're almost out of time. But now, Bud Selig, one of the things that has been the place where the owners and the players have really cooperated was the World Baseball Classic. And
Right.
Don Fear and Bud Selig talked proudly about putting that together. And it has had a fair amount of success, even more so outside the country than in the U.S. But that was done, I guess, primarily to try to create a larger footprint for baseball overseas. Do you see eventually teams from other countries being part of Major League Baseball?
No, I don't see them in the league, but I do think we're going to get more and more foreign players. We have a lot of Australian kids playing in our farm system, and eventually, of course, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan have good players. China is now beginning. We have a couple kids from the Netherlands that are playing professional baseball, and that's all a good thing. One of the problems in baseball right now, and will be, is the good athletes, and particularly the northeast of the United States, are playing lacrosse in the springtime rather than baseball. And there are fewer and fewer African Americans playing baseball. Like in the old days when Willie Mays was coming up, they'd play in the streets of New York and so forth. We have programs to try to get African Americans to play, but most of the good African American athletes are playing basketball. So baseball has a bit of a problem getting the real good athletes. That's why there's so many Latin players now, Dominican, Puerto Rican, Venezuelan, Panama, and so forth. And that is a concern of mine.
Last question, who's your all-time favorite baseball player? And then who's your favorite player with the Philadelphia Phillies? I know you love them all, but.
John Kruk was probably one of my favorites. And the best player I've ever seen is Mike Schmidt, that played for the Phillies. I'll leave you with two other little thoughts here. Have you ever thought about what the world would be like if we didn't have sports? Just think about that. I mean, what in the world would we do? We read about it, we listen to it, we watch it on TV, we go with our wives, we go with our kids to a Phillies game. The world has a lot of problems, but I think we'd have a whole lot more if we didn't have sports to go to and enjoy and follow and, you know, root for your community. The other thought I have is the greatest miracle in life is not really winning the World Series. The greatest miracle are your family and friends. So thank you for having me.
Okay, folks, thanks for coming. If you want to say hi to Mr. Giles, we're going to be here another couple of minutes.